Hello, everyone. This is Makeba Dixon Hill, and it gives me great pleasure to kick off this amazing art salon that's being powered by ADAMA, which stands for the African Diaspora Art Museum of Atlanta. If you would like to know more about this fantastic organization that's emerging as a 21st century reimagined creative space that aptly affirms that wherever we go, we're especially seeing that now with the times that we're living in. You can follow them on Instagram at ADAMA, ADAMA _ ATL, or online at adamatl.org. It is so beautiful to see so many people coming into the chat. So much love to you all, and definitely thank yous and hellos to our esteemed panelists, and happy Mother's Day to the mothers that are represented not only here, but also down here and out here in the world. We are just so thankful to your contribution. So we love you and we appreciate you, and we're sending virtual hugs and appreciation. I was realizing that during this time of physical distancing, and for the work that I do as the curator of education at the Spelman College Museum of Fine Art, that I was taking some things for granted. And one of that is being that it's a culturally specific institution, and what we do is celebrate Black women culture producers at all times. And so in this moment that I've been experiencing for the past month and some change, because sometimes I go out. So, yeah. And I'm in Georgia, so you already know how that's going. But I'm being safe, I promise. And it's this moment of recognizing just how life-giving, sustaining, familiar, and magical, not to be a cliche with Black girl magic, but like it's real though. And it's just been really something special to kind of have this platform. So I want to kind of share with you how we'll be flowing today. We're actually going to go into introductions of the esteemed panelists. And if you have any questions, feel free to drop them throughout the conversation, because I can find ways to either integrate them into the discussion or wait until the end. So we'll have multiple ways to be in dialogue in so many different ways here. So I would like to start off with introducing Andrea Chung. Andrea Chung lives and works in San Diego, California. She received a Bachelor of Arts degree from Patterson School of Design in New York and a Master's of Fine Art from the Maryland Institute College of Art in Baltimore. Her recent Biennale and museum exhibitions include Prospect 4 in New Orleans and the Jamaican Biennale in Kingston, Jamaica, as well as the Chinese American Museum and California African American Museum in Los Angeles, and the San Diego Art Institute, among many others. In 2017, her first solo museum exhibition took place at the Museum of Contemporary Art in San Diego, titled "You Broke the Ocean in Half to Be Here." She has participated in national and international residencies, including the Vermont Studio Center and Skowhegan School of Painting and Sculpture, among several others. Her work has been written about in several magazines and publications, most notably ArtNet, Los Angeles Times, and the International Review of African American Art. She has also had academic essays looking at the subject of colonialism and slavery in the Caribbean. She currently has an exhibition titled "The Other Side of Now: Foresight and Contemporary Caribbean Art" at the Paris Art Museum in Miami through June 7th, 2020. Next, Ebony Patterson. I was thinking about Ebony in relationship to lining everyone up in alphabetical order, but organizing it kind of goes in a different way. And after finishing up Shanequa's bio, I was thinking about those final words about Michelle Obama, and it brought me to Becoming. And for those of you all who saw Becoming, one of the things that she mentions is to know me is to know that I'm from the South Side of Chicago. To know Ebony Patterson is to know that she's from Kingston, Jamaica. In her most recent artist statement, she says that for almost 5 years, I have been exploring the idea of gardens, both real and imagined, and their relationship to post-colonial spaces. I am interested in how gardens, natural but cultivated settings, operate with social demarcations. I investigate their relationship to beauty, dress, class, race, the body, land, and death. These new works create an immersive installation, a nocturnal garden that acknowledges bodies and sites, that use pageantry and beauty to create presence in gardens gone awry. We come to pause, to bear witness, and to acknowledge. And this was from an artist statement of hers in 2018. And also, she has an exhibition that is currently on view that originated at the Perez Museum, but will now be at the National Museum, titled When the Dew is Still on the Roses, an immersive installation and exhibition. And Shanequa Gay. Shanequa Gay is an Atlanta native and has received degrees in graphic design and fashion marketing from the Art Institute of Atlanta, painting from the Savannah College of Art and Design, and an MFA from Georgia State University. Gay was one of 10 selected artists for Off the Wall, a citywide mural initiative that was organized by Wanderroot and was focused on the Atlanta Super Bowl host committee in 2018. In 2013, she was chosen by the Congressional Club to be the illustrator for the First Lady's Luncheon Hostess Gift for former, but always, First Lady Michelle Obama. Gay's work has graced the walls of several private and public collections that include museums and other traditional and non-traditional spaces. When looking at her website, she really leads with her artist statement, so I find it fitting to read a portion of that as well. Her work evaluates place, tradition, storytelling, and subject matter to develop imaginative dialogues and alternative strategies for self-imagining. Through installations, painting, performance, video, and monumental sculpture figures, she is fabricating environments of ritual and memorial, depicting amalgamated images of familiar iconography, new gods, and mythical figures, not creatures, whose lives have been impacted by systematic inequalities. By developing counter and reimagined narratives that live within the duality of physical and spiritual worlds, she is exploring the historical and contemporary social concerns of hybrid cultures through the gaze of the female gaze, and how these cultures have been rendered invisible and their identities denied. And finally, Shani Jamila, who is a Spelman alumna, so happy to have you here. Shani is a Brooklyn-based conceptual artist whose work explores identity, ancestry, and the importance of place as well. She utilizes her family's genealogical records as a primary source, and her travels to nearly 50 countries throughout the Americas, Asia, Africa, Europe, and the Caribbean also deeply inform her practice. Jamila is a 2020 Artist Fellow in Fine Arts, Painting at the National Arts Club. She's been awarded fellowships and residencies to support her work from Mass MoCA, TED, the Aspen Institute, Ace Hotel, and the J. William Fulbright Foundation. Her podcast, Lineage, features artist-to-artist dialogues about making home in New York City. Shani's portrait and quote are featured in A Choice to Change the World, a permanent installation at her alma mater at Spelman College. And for everyone that is featured, I'll be dropping their websites and further information that kind of talks about some of the things that I mentioned in their respective bios and artist statements. Thank you all so much for saying yes and being here.
Thank you for having us.
You are so welcome. You are so welcome. So first, how about a wellness check-in? How are you doing today? How's your heart?
Just waking up.
True.
Hey, I'm 2 hours ahead of, an hour behind you, Ebony. So.
God bless you.
For real.
Definitely.
Definitely.
The high of Erica and Jill last night. So
Yeah.
for the moment, I'm good.
Right. All things are well here. I'm enjoying Mother's Day away from people. So this is great.
Yeah, I hear that common statement for so many mothers is, can you just give me a room to be in and some space, maybe a clean kitchen?
I hide in the shower.
Right.
That helps. I take long showers so I can hide and lock the door.
I have a full-grown adult, so I can drive away from him.
Yes.
Loving it. And for those of you all who are not close to your mothers, meaning physically or have that moment, but are feeling their presence with this distance, sending love to you as well. As I was beginning, my mother and I lived together, and that has been a whole journey that has taken me in so many different places. But in this time, I just am so grateful to be so physically close to her. So for those of you all who aren't, I'm sending love to you as well, and that, especially today. And so when we're uplifting what being a creator in so many ways means, there's that moment of, you know how you got here technically, but I want to kind of hear from you all in your artistic practice and where you find yourself localized in this moment. How did you get to this place? And it's open to start wherever you feel comfortable and from whomever on the panel.
I mean, I'll jump in because you're talking about mothers. And my project is one that's rooted in the history of my own family, my family's lineage. So one of my grandmothers, my father's mom, was a genealogist. And she spent hours upon hours in the archives, paging through phone books, cold calling people she thought might be kin to us to find out who their people were. Mm-hmm. She wrote books, she wrote charts, and she left us this really extraordinary body of work that details our family's history as far back as she could trace us, which on that side goes back to my great-great-great-great-grandmother Shani, who was born January 22nd, 1800, and died January 21st, 1906. So she saw, the entire 19th century. And so my project is really about making my own kind of genetic map in the abstract paintings that I make and in the soundscapes that accompany them, which come from interviews with my family's elders. I want to take this moment. I think my mama and my daddy are watching right now, so let me tell her Happy Mother's Day. Thank you. And thank you to all the mothers out there. Your work really does mean a lot, and in my particular case, roots my entire practice.
Thank you for that, Shani. And actually, there's this moment in many instances when we kind of pour that libation. So with this moment too, you can, I want to know if there's anybody you all want to bring into the room.
My great-grandmother, Estella Battle. My great-auntie, Hessie Lorraine Battle. My great-grandmother, Garly Miller. I'll stop there because I could be out there.
Ashe. I would like to bring in my god aunt, Flora Carter.
want to say the name of my grandmother, Rosetta O'Neill, my grandmother, Hattie Fields, and I want to bring in artistic ancestors as well. So I'd like to say the name of Alma Thomas.
Mm-hmm. So let's get on to these routes. How did you get here, Ebony?
Well, I mean, that's a complicated question. So I think that, I know that from when I was very young, both my parents nurtured this interest in creativity. Actually, they planted the seeds and then were totally stunned by the fact that I decided I wanted to be an artist. You know, my mother taught me how to draw people. My father taught me how to draw birds. And interestingly enough, they are both, you know, they both grew up in rural poverty. They both came from really poor, disenfranchised communities. And in many ways, in their own families, are kind of their own success stories. I still talk to my mother about my work, even if she doesn't understand everything I'm doing. So like even during the time I've been in quarantine, I've been making some drawings and I'll send her some photographs and she will tell me, well, I think you need to correct that. That doesn't quite look right. That looked too big. That looked too long. But, you know, and then when I sent her, like even recently, I sent her like all the photos of the things that she'd been giving, photos of all the things she'd been giving me feedback on. She was like, oh, I was helping you to draw some hands. Ah, I see it now. But, you know, so I think that like, you know, in many ways, especially when I think about my mother is is an incredibly theatrical person. And I know she'd shared with me when I was younger that if her circumstances, you know, like she always liked theater. She had always had this dream of like being an actress. But, you know, I think that because of the time that she grew up in and then also the circumstances, she was the first of 9 children. And the only one to really go to high school in a formal sense. There were a lot of responsibilities placed on her, so the family had to come first. One of the things that I'm really happy for her in this phase of her life is, you know, she's incredibly involved in our church community and she does monologues all the time that gives her space to engage in a theatrical practice. So I feel you know, in many ways, I'm also living out the dreams or desires of my parents. But these were also my dreams and desires. And while they had, you know, a tough time understanding, I remember when I said, my mom also sings on the choir. My father used to always sing too. They have beautiful voices. My dad used to love to dance. And I can remember like on Saturdays, him in his tighty whities and we dancing. You know, to James Brown in the living room or whatever. Just really beautiful memories around, you know, being creative and active together as a kid. And so I remember when I decided I told them I wanted to be a part-time singer and an artist. It was said to me, oh, you think you're going to be the next Mariah Carey? You're never going to make any money because people don't make money as artists. So, you know, like I had a responsibility also too to open the eyes of my parents, even though I didn't understand either what it really meant or what the possibilities were of being an artist, but to show them what was possible in this kind of blind journey that I was walking. And their continued support their continued support in spite of not knowing is what has continued to feed, you know, my confidence. My father died in 2010. And the summer that he fell really ill, I was part of a really significant show at the National Gallery called Young Talent. And that summer was also, I think, a big marker in my practice in terms of the kinds of materials that I was venturing into. The scale at which I was working at was also, you know, shifting significantly. And my father got to witness that essentially 1 week before he went into hospital after suffering 2 massive strokes and then dying at the end of the year. So I feel like, if there was ever, he would always ask me if I had sold a painting yet, that the paintings were too big and I needed to make them small and to paint flowers. Go figure. But, I felt like, like we had talked a bit about that show, and he was, kind of, shocked that I had made these things. And I feel like there is kind of a security in knowing and understanding that your kid is gonna be okay. And that, and today's hard, being far away from my mom is really hard. Because my mom is my home. She's my everything. And I'm an only kid, so I'm very fortunate to have this like incredible friendship with my mother. My mother is really my girlfriend, So today's a little tough. It is.
Understandable. We're so glad that you came. Yeah.
I'd like to say that I've met Ebony's mother, and she's just like a really beautiful, giving person, and always supporting her. So and I know their closeness, so I can see, why it would be so tough for her. They're everywhere together, and she does everything for her mother. So I can, I completely understand.
Yeah. So, Andrea, since you are reflecting, how about with you? I know that when we talk about beginnings and routes, we have decisions on where we want to start and also where we want to end. How about you? What journey are you interested in sharing with us today on your path to giving?
I think much like Ebony, because our parents are from the Caribbean, I have a similar background in the sense of the way that my parents grew up. My dad was also one of 9, and my mom was one of 6. I think the difference between Ebony and I is that she did have a supportive structure, and that her parents did encourage her to do that. I had the opposite, the complete opposite. And I've always wanted to be an artist since I was small. I can remember some of my earliest drawings. And I think I just had to sort of take it upon myself to sort of navigate, I guess, my dream in some senses. I applied to college when I was 17. I went to summer school every summer to get out of the situation that I was in, and left for New York when I was 17. And, despite not having the support of my family, I just kept going. I just knew that I didn't want the life that they currently had. They had a life that they felt was successful, but it was very much about appearances, and that wasn't what I was at all interested in. So I went to school, stayed in New York for a while, and then I met my husband. And I think had it not been for him, I probably wouldn't have gone to grad school. He was a history major, and I was really engaged in things that he was learning when he was at UCLA, and really jealous, like that he was being fed all of this amazing knowledge. And then I was like, I have to go back to school. And for me, it was like, if this does not work out, then I was not meant to be an artist. I kind of like put everything on this one experience. So we got married, and like 2 months later, we moved to Baltimore, and I was at MICA. And I was very fortunate to have had an amazing grad director who, her name's Frances Barth. She's a painter. She, white woman who understood exactly what it was going to be like for me. I was there with Pamela Sundstrom as well, and she really pushed us and made sure that we were prepared for how, you know, the world would treat us and treat our work. So I think that, I mean, I'm still afraid of her now. She treats me differently. She tries to treat me somewhat like a peer, but she's never going to be a peer to me. You know, I owe her so much. And then honestly, me getting to where I am now has a lot to do with the support of my peers and my friends that are artists. Ebony is a prime example of someone who has, you know, really supported my career and has been someone that I can talk to about my work. You know, excellent feedback. Fahamu has been supportive as well. I've just been very fortunate to have friends that have been so helpful. You know, I keep in touch with the people that I meet at residencies. There's one artist in particular, Samira Yamin. I met her when I was pregnant at a residency, and she was so incredibly helpful and supportive. And she was at my son's baby shower, and I was at her wedding, you know. So I think these kinds of relationships are what have gotten me through a lot of, you know, the struggles that you go through as an artist. I think my mother has now come around to being extremely supportive now. I think that my parents recently got divorced about 2 years ago. And I think that transformation has changed our relationship for the better. I think that we were both in an abusive household that we didn't recognize, and us supporting each other, getting out of that situation. At 71, she left everything in that house and moved to Florida, where she is now. So I think that that relationship has been great, and that she is now open to the things that I do. She comes to my openings. It was super surreal seeing her at the Perez talking to Franklin sermons and her cracking jokes and stuff like, I mean, it's not something that I ever thought would happen. Like, I had a dream of being an artist, but it's still, I never thought I would get this far. You know, like, I never thought I would ever get this far. So I'm still figuring it out. Like, I don't have answers. I'm just sort of going with it and winging it. And, you know, I have the support of my immediate family, my husband and my son and my mother and my mother-in-law. And, you know, I'm just doing what I can do.
And that's a lot. That is a lot. I remember this comment around, it's a Bible scripture, but I saw it applied in the most unbiblical way. And it was someone who presented themselves as everything that would make you afraid. And I remember him saying to me on the street, "Fear not." And it became something that was just so much more than that, because it's like that angel can be right there in your face, you know, and it's that first utterance usually when that transformative moment happens, which is fear not. But something that Shanequa talks about a lot is this moment of being someone that moves while being afraid, and that conversation around do it anyway while shaking in your boots. And you've done a lot of that, Shanequa. So can you talk a little bit about your route? And you recently presented about purpose. So I'm going to drop that in the comment chat where you can maybe hear a little bit more. But feel free to chat about your route in whatever way you feel moved to.
Sure. My parents were supportive in the best way they knew how to be supportive, right? And so they gave me the tools that they felt I needed in order to take a path, most specifically as an entrepreneur. One of the things that used to kind of baffle me growing up is that when I would ask where my creative gift came from, nobody seemed to know. It was always like this kind of question mark up in the air. But it was always on display. My creativity was always on display. So you know how your parents kind of put you forward, like that baby can draw. My baby can draw. Look at my baby draw. And so like that was like, you know, that support and that encouragement. But it's like, well, where is this coming from? Only to look up and see that my mother was a seamstress and she made all my clothes, but she didn't attribute that as creativity, but life function. Like, this is how I'm getting through life. You know, macrame all over the house, crafts all over the house. Even the way she decorated the house was a representation that creativity was like in her hands, but she didn't see it as that. I would even say the same for my pop. Like, my father was, you know, what I always consider my own personal DJ. Like, my father was the one who introduced me to Too Short and Poison, right? So like I had like all of this kind of creativity right in front of my face, but they kept saying they didn't know where I got it from. My great grandmother, my great aunties who I mentioned for libation, like these were quilters. And again, women who taught me about crafts. And so I figured out kind of early on that my art was a good hustle. I would use it as a way to, you know, I would create, paint on my friends' clothes, the caricatures, hip hop caricatures, cartoons. I would do my friends' poster boards, like all the stuff in order to make $1. And so I figured early on that I could be able to hustle my gift, but didn't understand that it was actually a gift that I was called to do. Like it had some purpose behind it. It just, I never thought it was something I could actually live out my life and do. One, because I come from a background of teachers and preachers and military people. And so being a creative ain't the move. I better go get a real job or talk to Jesus or go get married, right? There's no in between, right? There's no in between. And so, you know, initially I was going to go, initially going to go into the Navy. I was a drill team captain throughout high school, ROTC drill team captain. I'm also the firstborn of 2. My mother is the firstborn of 5, and then 2 they didn't know about. And my father is the firstborn of 10. So telling people what to do is very much ingrained in me. But leadership, you know, finding and understanding I was a leader, but a leader in a different way. I really wanted to pursue my creative path and kind of go against the grain of my family. And I thought it was more important that I pursue my calling as opposed to pursuing what the people in my life wanted me to do. And that is a part of being an artist, right? Being rebellious, being very rebellious and going against the grain. And I believe I found this gift and this path by shifting in and out of modes in my life. You know, kind of when I was married, I found myself making myself small in order for my husband to be who he needed to be. You know, shout out to anybody who has, you know, denied themselves in order for somebody else to live. But one of the things I found was that like I was kind of dying in my marriage. I was not being myself. And, you know, outside of separating from my ex-husband and then taking myself back to school eventually, but I went back to school because I had stopped creating, right? You know, I lost my brother back in 2008. When you're talking about a very best friend, when you're talking about an ever-present help, my brother was that person. Now I'm from Atlanta, so my brother was a ATL shouty all the way down, right? But he was always at my art shows. He was always encouraging me to pursue my gift. And my brother was like my best friend, right? So similar to some of the stories that were shared, like I grew up in a very tormented household, right? With a lot of abuse and violence. So while I didn't ever question whether my parents loved and cared about me, they had a lot of hell going on inside of the household. And when you grow up like that, you know, my brother was like my war buddy, you know what I mean? And so when you're growing up with a war buddy, when you lose your war buddy, you don't know how to tackle the world. And so I stopped creating for about 3 or 4 years. I do not want to cry because Ebony has already shown that we could cry.
She was gonna make me cry. I was like, no.
I want to cry, but you know, you find your voice in different ways. And so I felt like, you know, I need to live. I need to live. I can't die with my brother. And he would want me to pursue my path. He would want me to pursue my creative gift. He would want me to be the person that, you know, I feel like God has called me to be. And so it's really important that I'm creating to live. You know what I mean? I'm creating to pursue life as it's supposed to be. And I found my voice through my brother dying. Oh my God, are we supposed to be crying?
We're supposed to be doing anything we want to do. It's
but all of that to say, I've had an amazing support system, similar to what has been mentioned. My mother is my road dog. She lives here in Georgia. She is at everything. Those of you who have met and know my mom, she's at everything. She supports me in everything. She is my funder. She's been my supporter. She has, you know, laid hands on me, delivered me, prayed for me, got me through this path that I'm pursuing as a creative and not knowing where I'm going with it. But, you know, just been an amazing support system to me. And, you know, along with other creatives and artists that have helped me along this path that I'm calling the art life that I choose and want to live. And so I'm gonna stop because I'm done crying. Y'all ain't finna get me in this. All I got is toilet paper.
Don't waste the TP. Just use your shirt. Don't waste the TP.
Had to do the snot nose crying, just the whole.
Hey. And I encourage you all to go into these comments and really hear the words that may not be coming while we're in conversation in this type of way, but consistently with every word that's uttered from each of you, you're hearing people that say, I love you, I appreciate you, it's okay, I remember your mom. Yet all of those things are happening. So you actually have this other archive that's happening and not just the one that's happening here. And I think that that really segues into this conversation of, oh, I see Jamila, lineage, let's talk about it. Your feature, take it away. I mean, there's this moment, let me just say two things though. Two small things. While Shanequa was talking and really kind of bringing home this moment around how the people in our families have used, in many ways, their hands in their own intuitive industrial creative methodologies that may not have been called ARTT, an accent over the first A, you know, that kind of art or anything of that nature. It makes me think of this museum, and something that's really important is calling forth the names of African American museums to really know that that is a lineage of that work happening in a contemporary space as well. The Reginald F. Lewis Museum presented an exhibition called Material Girls. And the very reason, the impetus for creating that exhibition was the curator commenting on coming from a Caribbean family and having a line of women who were seamstresses, women who made clothes, and in their clothes, that's where the love was. And recognizing that there's so many different languages in which we can express care, concern, and presenting a legacy that kind of lives on. So thank you so much. Just by you all being, you've kind of created space for us to also name exhibitions and bring forth the other names of artists that are doing this, to quote Marion Hassinger, women's work that kind of ushers us not only forward, but upward as well. So Shani, Jamila, being in this place where you're also using your voice, literally, with your Lineage podcast, can you talk to us a little bit about that? Not only with what you're doing, but like what that has kind of come out of you, you know, moving from a space of your artistic practice, but also kind of putting you in this other role, extended role of collaborator as well with your podcast series.
Yeah, thank you for that question.
You're welcome.
Honestly, the first thing I want to say is thank for how much I appreciate each one of you on this call right now, and how grateful I am for this conversation. and for the honesty and for the love and for the transparency and for the community. And, you know, nothing about this work is easy. Nothing about this time that we're living through is easy. And it's important to be able to have these kinds of spaces where we can just say that, you know, and feel that with each other. So I'm grateful for this moment and for y'all. The story that's coming to my mind right now, and to answer your question, Makeba, is about my uncle, John O'Neill, who was the first son of the genealogist grandmother that I was referencing at the beginning. He's one of my biggest artistic influences as well. He passed away last year on Valentine's Day. But Uncle John, when he graduated from college in the early 60s, left Illinois and decided to move down south to join the movement. And he went on to become a field director with Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, SNCC. And he also became the co-founder of this group called the Free Southern Theater. And this was a troupe that was basically the cultural arm of SNCC. And they would travel around the rural South and do plays as an organizing tool, so that people who might not pick up a brochure, or people who might not come to a meeting, may come to a play and then could still have access to the same kinds of themes that the movement was working to organize around in the form of art and culture. And so Uncle John taught me a couple of things. He taught me about the importance of stories. And he also taught me about how art and social change are very much interlinked. And so I grew up with that understanding. And you know, I spent many years working in the human rights sector, always weaving in art. And then in the art that I make, I'm always weaving in those same human rights themes. So there was this moment in 2018 when I'd shown a suite of collages and a soundscape at the Manifesta Biennale in Palermo, Italy. And when I came back, I was going through my stuff and just kind of taking inventory of what I had. And I found this tall, thin box in a corner with my grandma's handwriting on it. And I remember that when she passed away, we all went to her storage unit to take something to remember her by. And I'd taken this box. And so I hadn't seen it in many years. I opened it up, pulled out this scroll of paper. I unfurled it. It goes from the furthest end of my apartment all the way down the hallway to the furthest end. And what it was a family tree that she made, handwritten, that chronicled 8 generations of our family and the research that she conducted on, as she would put it, who we be and where we belong. And so finding that chart was a moment where I literally felt my life change. You don't always get to feel it when your life changes. I felt it in that moment. And I knew that the work that I was doing needed to shift. And the vocabulary that I was creating artistically needed to expand, because this was a story that I needed to tell. So the paintings that I make incorporate symbology from the charts that she left us and are telling the story of our family's history. What does it mean for us as an African-American family to have made home in this country for over 200 years? So in the process of making this visual work, the podcast that I'm doing now, which is called Lineage, is really an outgrowth of my visual arts practice, because I realized I couldn't just be looking back, that all the questions that I was exploring in this practice about how we made home here are really still relevant right now. And so I wanted to have conversations with my neighbors and my peers and fellow artists about how they were navigating these dynamics in their work. So the project, I did about 15 interviews last year to launch season 1. I'm talking to some of our most imaginative thinkers, MacArthur Fellows and Pulitzer Prize winners and emerging artists and Bessie Award winners, et cetera. It's a mix of folks about how these themes are integrated into their practice. So the podcast debuted on February 18th of this year, which is the birthday of Toni Morrison and Audre Lorde. And now those stories are being broadcast bi-weekly on lineagepodcast.com and on podcast platforms. But for me, the most important part of it is this is me making the research that I'm doing for my visual arts practice public, and us telling our stories and creating our own archive of who we be and where we belong.
Thank you. When you're looking at a lineage that goes back that far, there's also a discussion about going that far into the future. So I'm going to ask something that's real wild right now, but Shanequa said it in one of her talks, so I'm going to say it. You said seeing yourself 500 years from now. You remember that in one of your videos? So I'm going to ask y'all this wild, expansive question. Where do you want to see your art, yourself, and or your lineage, if you want to kind of separate that into something different, 500 years from now? If you want to do 250, because you know it's it's a Sunday, so but there's going to be 2 zeros. It's 3 digits.
Hope the planet is still here.
Okay.
True that.
First of all, Makeba, stop bringing up the past.
What did Erica say? She's not moved by time. Let's bring that back into space.
Right. Well, it is the African perspective to not be moved by time, right? That time is circular. That is not in a line, but that it goes in a circle. So we are representing past, present, and future right here, right now. You know, like I said, if the planet is still here.
Big if.
We're not doing too well right now.
But if not, we may be having a whole nother way to live too. So
Right.
Honestly, the planet's gonna be here. We might not as humans. Because Mother Nature's gonna win if we keep testing.
Right. That's right. Mama gonna win every single time. That's right.
I'm still asking though.
I just hope that as far as like my artwork, I hope it's in the hands of people who look like me or people that I come from. I don't want it in the hands of someone who's going to, I guess, bastardize the legacy of what I've made or not share the stories that I'm trying to share. I do have a specific audience when I make this work. There's just no representation for us. I mean, I couldn't have named a single Caribbean artist when I was younger. But when I say someone who looks like me, you know, I mean the entire diaspora. I think we all have something to learn from each other. And I would just hope that that knowledge could be passed down the way oral histories are passed down. You know, I want that to stay within us and our culture long enough so that my own ancestors can have access to it. I mean, I don't think that long term. I'm just trying to like get through the day. You know, make sure that my son is my legacy. But yeah, I mean, I hope that, you know, as much as these institutions are built around, you know, these, you know, quote unquote classic Renaissance artists or whatever, I hope that that we'll be able to have longevity that goes past that. And that, you know, if they won't acknowledge how powerful and amazing we are, at least we can tell ourselves and remind ourselves of that without needing some kind of validation.
This is a follow-up question for you. When you said, when you identified institutions, what do you want the institution to do in order to support your work being able to be sustained for years and years and years to come? What's important to you from an institution as an artist?
I mean, not when I say, you know, having longevity and being in the hands of people who look like me, I don't even necessarily mean it has to be an institution. I mean, I think about how, I mean, to be quite frank, I can't afford my own work, you know, like, and I would love for people to have access to the work in a way that, you know, I still can't. I don't know what, like, I don't know how that would be. I don't know what that would look like. But as far as institutions, don't put us in storage, you know, forever. Actually conserve the work properly. Don't show us just in February. You know, actually have rotating shows that don't just look at us for being Black. Look at our aesthetics. Like, look at what we can accomplish. Like, I remember I was at a conference, and it was a conference for residencies, and this woman was saying how it was so hard for them to manage diversity because, you know, what happens when you want an artist of color, but you also want a video artist? And I was like, how do you separate the two? We do everything. I was like, we do it all. So the fact that she couldn't even, like, that didn't compute in her brain, I was just like, what is wrong with you? But I, you know, look at our work for what it is and not just what your limitations of an understanding of what we are, who we are, and what we can be. So as far as like institutions, I support, I feel like I've gotten to the point now where I can be a little more selective on where I show and who I show with and who I work with. And that's a total privilege. That now I only want to work with institutions that I actually like and support the ideals that I believe in, and curators that I like and are not just trying to be art stars too. You know, like I am trying to be a little more pragmatic about how I select shows and who I work with. You know, I don't need it to be in art form or anything like that. I just want to work with good people and good institutions. And, you know, background checks. I ask people, how has your experience been with those people? But yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't want it to just be solely based on institutions. I do want to somehow figure out how my work can be in the hands of people who, you know, who I really am trying to speak to.
I would hope, just to piggyback on that, that I can make it so, meaning that I write it as a part of my legacy, that my work has to be in certain institutions. And if that means the Shanequa Gay Museum, right? Or that it would be required to be in HBCU museums, or, right? So I think it would seem at times our goals have a tendency to only reach for white institutions only. And I would hope that, you know, that I could write it so that people who look like me are required to house and handle my work. Similar, I have a legacy, I have a seed, I have a son. I would hope within my will that I make it so and require him to have some responsibilities over my body of work. Outside of the visual, more than anything, I hope that my ideas are being transferred, that my knowledge and wisdom is being shared, that you know, the legacy of imagination and the freedom thereof is being passed on. What I loved about Bell Hooks is that she created her own institution before dying. I think we have the capabilities of doing that if we so choose. And so seeing beyond what we see now, I would be cool if my work was only housed in elementary schools, right? I would be cool if my work was only housed in community-based museums, right? So making it so that all peoples have access to it. And similar, I don't want to be just shown in February.
I actually think libraries are underutilized spaces. There's, oddly enough, there's a lot of libraries here in San Diego that have exhibition space that just nobody uses, which I'm kind of shocked. And especially in the neighborhood that I live in, it's mostly Black and brown. And I'm really surprised that no one has like taken upon themselves to have interaction with the community and actually put up work, or, you know, just do some kind of exchange. It's, I don't know.
Think about how I go back to artists, you know, maybe not 500 years back, but I'm thinking right now, like Harlem Renaissance era artists, for instance, right? Who I feel like looking at their work is almost a kind of time travel, right? Like if I'd gotten to know Zora, you know, if I been friends with Catherine Dunham. Like what might they have told me? I suspect that's in their work, you know, because that's where you put the things that and the ideas that are most important to you and that animate your life. And so one of the things that I'd like to do is be able to inspire future time travelers, you know, who are coming back and looking at my work. And the phrase that keeps popping up into my head as I'm listening to us have this conversation is Octavia Butler when she wrote out the future she saw for her own work in those diary pages that you may have seen online. And if not, Google them because they're dope. But one of the repeating phrases that she kept writing was, so be it, see to it. So be it, see to it.
Yeah, I hope that in the future my work is no longer valid. I hope that my work is no longer valid, that it doesn't, there is not this, you need to still justify the dignity of people. You know, I hope that my work becomes a marker of what once was, not what is still, you know, that it becomes a way of anchoring where we should not be, you know, a lesson learned. That's what I hope. And I also hope that, I also hope that, that we would have also moved on from the question of whether or not, if you exist in spaces that are considered small economies, like where I come from in the Caribbean, that somehow our contributions don't continue to be overlooked, you know, and that we are taken seriously. And I also hope that we realize that, you know, there's no line separating, you know, separating us really, besides the lines that we've made in our imaginations, between us and the person who cleans the street, us and the gardener, us and the person who helps us domestically. So I hope it all becomes irrelevant. That's what I hope.
We just got a question. No, right? Yeah. We just got a question from the community, and this is from Constance, and it says, what has been your most challenging piece or series to create where you had to really push yourself? Does that align with your earlier work, or are you still surprising/challenging yourself now? I can read it again too.
Yeah.
I'll break it down because Constance went layered, like I did. My question was, so what has been your most challenging piece or series to create where you had to really push yourself?
I think
go ahead. No, I'll let you go.
No, you go ahead.
No, you go.
No.
You go.
I have two pieces, but I think for me, the piece that's up at the Perez right now was probably the hardest piece I've ever had to make. Not because, I mean, technically, I don't often do video. So for me, it was, you know, technical challenges. I had to hire someone to do that aspect of it. But like emotionally, it was incredibly draining. I had been sitting on it for a while. For those who don't know, my father doesn't speak to me anymore. I haven't spoken to him in 5 years. He doesn't speak to my son. He doesn't acknowledge me. When quarantine started, I sent him a text just to ask, you know, I hope you guys are okay, you know, be safe. And he said, he responded to me saying, we're fine, we're being careful, thanks for asking. But no asking of how we were doing, if my son is okay, you know? It was a huge slap in the face. And that relationship just continues to deteriorate. So the piece that's at the Perez now is sort of like the end of a relationship. And I had to sit on that for a couple of years to figure out how I could find the right, find the courage, I guess, to make that work, and to like let myself be that emotionally raw, because it's been an incredibly painful experience for me. I'm not gonna cry. But, and then to put it out there for everyone to see, like my mom saw it, my aunt saw it, and then to just like have it on public display was like a really, like the most vulnerable I think I've ever been. So yeah, I think that was very hard, and it deals with like the end of a relationship and how to learn to love yourself despite the ending of that relationship, and how you sort of like move on, and sort of juxtaposing it with this idea of, you know, no matter how you try to conform, that you will never quite be accepted, and thinking about how colonies, how they may try to follow these structures that were put in place by the colonizer, and no matter what you do, you'll never quite be, you know, you'll never quite be accepted by the so-called mother country. So yeah, that was a really painful piece to do, but I felt like I needed to get it out, of my system so that I could somewhat get over it, because a lot of the issues that I have with my dad had to do with this being considered a failure. So I felt like if I could properly get this out in a way that someone else could take from it, then I could sort of debunk his idea of me being a failure. Okay, somebody say something funny because I'm gonna start to cry.
Well, I'll bring some light or not. A piece that or the body of work that I was kind of encouraged by my family not to do was actually over at Hammond's House Museum, the Lit Without Sherman. My father actually called and asked that I not give up too much information about my family. So the reason I was invested in doing creating that mural work over at the Hammond's House Museum is because right up the street on Oak Street is where, you know, where we kind of grew up, my grandmother lived. And what my father didn't want people digging up was the fact that my grandmother was a drug lord over there. And I know that's like an unconventional thing to say. My grandmother was a drug lord. You know, especially during the crack epidemic, my father being the oldest of 10, crack reached every last one of them, including my father, right? And so that is considered a sordid past, considered something that you should not say, considered taboo, considered a sin. Shanequa don't talk about our family's work. And so not just my father, but uncles, all of them were like, you know, it's fine what you say in the news about your work, but don't bring up our family. One of the pieces I have, I think, in my toile is $1 million block. My family ran the $1 million block, right? Where they were on the corner selling crack and whatnot. And so I think it was more important for me to do the work. So underneath all of those beautiful colors, I'm speaking to my own sordid past and the things that we are not supposed to talk about. And, you know, similar to what Andrea is saying, I have gone in and out of speaking to my own papa throughout my life, 4, 5, 6, and 7 years at a time. And so that is relatable.
I remember Ebony mentioning this in a podcast around people saying how beautiful her work is. And she would say, yes, but is it? And I just love how that beauty is in conversation with the things that sometimes we're not looking at or don't want to see, or, you know, this moment about being seen, how perception kind of works. Those are always some things that really are intertwined themes that when presented visually just create so much weighted and rich discussion. And it's so interesting because all 4 of you do extensive labor with your work, like the laborious process that can kind of come up with these intricate works, with these expansive works, and then this moment around seeing and not seeing that kind of come into that. Before I kind of move forward into another question, Shani, or Ebony, do you all want to answer Constance's question, or?
I mean, I feel like I would probably say the most, I don't know if it's the, because I feel like I'm always trying to find a way to re-examine the question that I set for myself with the work that I'd made before. You know what I mean? I would have to say I felt like making the Of 72 project was a challenging one. For multiple reasons, because at the time I made the project, the Of 72 project was about the Tivoli Gardens incursion. And Tivoli Gardens is a working class community in West Kingston. And I was actually home during the course of the incursion, which happened actually in May, I think it was like May 23rd, over the weekend of May 23rd of 2010. That this had all unfolded over the course of like 2 or 3 days, where 72 civilians were murdered. And the majority of the numbers of those people were men. So it was 72 men and 1 woman. Those were the initial numbers. And then just generally, there was kind of like this public attitude or outcry about the way people who come from these communities are viewed and seen. What's interesting is that, you know, when we think about who lives in these communities, and then the people who they end up serving are the very same people who are vilifying them and saying, well, you know, it's only criminals that come from down there anyway. It's not like they really matter. And then on the back end of that, people from the community were calling into the radio stations and begging for the Prime Minister to intervene and saying that they were being murdered. Just the horror of that playing out over the airwaves as everything was unfolding. I remember there was a story that was covered by an international paper about a mother and her 2 teenage sons. Police came, dragged the 2 of them out, took them up the street. You heard the gunshots. The older of the 2 of them ran past the gate as the mother looks up the street in horror and says, they just killed, you know, the older son says, they just killed his brother, and then they killed him in front of his mother, you know? And then it took 5 years for an inquiry to happen after public pressure. And then when that inquiry happened, it happened on television. And again, these people were victimized all over again. There was this, a lot of compassion for the soldiers and the police as they were testifying, but members who came from that community, whenever they were telling their stories or telling their, giving their perspectives on things that had happened to their loved ones or things that they had witnessed, that immediately they came into question. Your words are not to be trusted. You knew he was a criminal. You knew he was doing this. You knew he was doing that. And so when I made the work, I made it in 2011. There was absolutely no images of who these people were. There were no names. So then what did it mean then for a large number of people from a community that were all connected to the community that they were all taken away from, right? They weren't being accounted for in an official murder toll. They weren't being accounted for in police killings. So it's as if they never existed. So what does it mean then to say to a community of people, again, through not accounting for them, and by also not, no one accepting, no one accepting the responsibility as it related to these people and their deaths. What does it mean for a whole bunch of people to have just vanished, right? Mm-hmm. And even 5 years later, after the inquiry had happened, again, still there was not an official rollout of these names. And it also came to light that the number was probably twice the amount of that number. So in 2011, I just started making these small collages and over the course of those collages, I made 73 objects. And I was invited by Small Axe, who had an Andy Warhol grant, to make this project, or at least to share this project via its publication. So actually the funding that I got from Small Axe allowed me to actually make the project. And there was a text that accompanied the project that essentially just raised questions about who these people were, you know, in the most basic sense. Like, what was their favorite color? You know, were they a Beanie or Bounty Killer fan? You know, were they with somebody when they died? What were they wearing? You know, who were the loved ones? Humanizing people who I too didn't know and had questions about. And today, I mean, the work exists in an archive that I've made online, which is the off72project.com. I've seen it as a responsibility to like keep that up. And then the objects that I made also exist collectively, and they were all shown on a clothing line where they were essentially just pinned up using clothespins. So this idea of like hanging out a whole set of people to dry, and what does that mean fundamentally when we think about bodies like this? And then of course, there's also the larger question about how the system of value relates again to a colonial narrative, you know, and ways in which that post-colonial societies are still having to negotiate or still having to consider or push against these ideas. So in many ways, the project also opens up a much larger conversation beyond. It's not just about Tivoli, it is about communities that are like Tivoli. It's about people who are like the people who live in Tivoli Gardens.
Amen. Amen. Thank you. Shani, would you like to say something, or would you like to move on to the second question?
I guess I'll just speak really briefly because I want to make sure we get to as many questions as possible. But I would say the project that I'm working on now is something where, you know, I'm using my own family story to tell a larger story of African America, right? Like as us being emblematic of that, and just being really conscious of the ways that you know, a lot of these stories, I mean, for instance, like both of my grandmothers were raised by their grandparents who were born into enslavement and who were the product of rape, you know. So we have slave masters, you know, it's a constant story in our history and our culture, who were taking advantage of women who were enslaved by them. And so I use that as an example of the fact that there are a lot of stories that we don't always talk about, even though we know they're there. And I want to tell our story, and I also want to give the people who shared their stories with me, my aunties and my uncles, et cetera, like the dignity and privacy that they deserve as I'm telling the story. So trying to negotiate these dynamics is really difficult, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. We have 3 questions, and I actually want to respectfully use those 3 questions to close us out because of this sacred day, and to honor the time of the 4 people who are featured here, just to let them enjoy the rest of their Sunday. So I hope that you all can appreciate that, so we can move forward. We have a message coming from São Paulo, Brazil, by Luciani Silva. And she says, thank you. And she says, when I listen to you, I listen to artists right here in Brazil. We have similar, if not similar experiences. How do you feel the value of sharing experiences with Black female artists from other spaces of the diaspora, empowering, exchanging, and imagining new possibilities being? What is the value of, do you want me to You got it? How are you all feeling? You got the question?
Say it again, please.
Okay. So the question is, what is the value? We're specifically talking about conversations between Black women of the African diaspora. So when we are focused there, what do you believe is the value of sharing these experiences from one Black woman artist to the other, in terms of either empowering, exchanging, or imagining new possibilities of being within this shared space with these common artists?
I agree.
Okay.
You know, I think the value is the sharing, right? And that we now more than ever across cultures, across mediums, across technology, have the opportunity to share. So I think the answer is actually in the question, is that we are able to share from the diaspora and find that we all have a lot of similarities across the board, and to be able to problem solve as well. So what may be happening and moving over in Brazil, we may not have an answer over here in Atlanta. And so I think the sharing and dialogue is necessary. And we have access to that now more than ever.
Thank you so much for that question, Luciani, and I hope your family is safe. This is a question from Adam Patterson, and it's specifically for you, Ebony. He says, I can never look at your work without feeling grief. How has making work felt for you in these moments now, where we are grieving so much lost life, as well as grieving what feels like a lost world?
It has been very hard, Adam. Very, very, very hard. To be quite honest. I mean, you know, I was just on another panel yesterday and talking about the fact that, you know, like, because of the nature of my work, I had to come off social media altogether during this time. I did not find it useful at all. I found that it was, I would find myself continuously going into a hole of depression, because the work that I deal with is so much about trauma, and then we're all physically sitting in a moment of trauma and trying to find ways to navigate and negotiate that. So I found it incredibly difficult. And a good friend, well, two of my good friends have said to me, you know, I just have to lean into it. And leaning into it would mean many things, you know, like, so whatever you're feeling that day is okay. And how about you just stay in that day? And that's really what I've done, you know. So I'm used to like being a bit of a taskmaster. So I would get through a lot of shit, you know, and then, so I found it really difficult when people kept talking about what a great time this must be for artists, as if somehow artists are not also feeling in this moment, and and how this must be like being on an extended residency, like for real. Just like, no. So you know, there were days when I was just like, yo, I don't feel like working, because this is just too hard. You know, I also too, on a personal level, wasn't very, you know, like worried about whether or not I could use this time to get my summer body right. I mean, when I am, you know, like when I am anxious, when I am worried, like many people, I turn to food, and I was eating everything in sight. And those are the ways that I've honestly been coping, because it's been hard. It is very hard. And then on top of that, you know, like I live alone. And so the isolation on your own, with no other kinds of disruptors, also makes it incredibly difficult. It doesn't matter how many times and I'm not saying no, it does help. You know, like I have people who check in with me all the time, because they know that sometimes I struggle with depression, right? But there are times when it feels a lot, and you have to tell yourself, like, you gotta get out of the bed, you know, or in the beginning of all of this, when I became so aware of my body and how much I moved and now being contained in a place. I remember I had a friend too at the top of the, you know, when she realized what was going to happen in terms of the shutdown, she was telling me I should go home, you know, while on the back end, because usually I would have gone home earlier in the, like in March for my birthday, I always go home and I'm with my mom. But then on the back end of that, my mother was like, yo, I don't think you should come home based on what was beginning to happen. And coming home could also mean my endangering her. So the decision to stay on, you know, to not go home was also about the love for not wanting to endanger anybody else in the process. And then also too in keeping myself safe. But it started to also wreak havoc on my memories of living in Kentucky, to be quite honest, for 12 years, when I was very aware of never touching people, you know, and the fact that we're not able to touch people right now, and thinking about the fact that we are social beings, you know, we take for granted how important touch is to our livelihood, to our sustenance. And I'm not even talking about the touch of a full-on embrace with somebody else. You know, you go to the supermarket, say for example, and you hand off, your bag is handed to you by the person who helped pack it. But just the grazing of that person's skin against your skin is energy exchanged, you know? And for somebody who is very aware of when I am not receiving a touch, it's been really challenging. And so I've gotten permission from other people, which was really helpful, I think, in recognizing I too could give myself permission to do this. And sometimes that's what you need. Sometimes you need people to tell you that it's okay, so that you could come to a place of recognizing that it is okay. And so, yeah, Adam, I've been sitting in it like everybody else, and there are times when I make and there are times when I don't, because it's just too hard that day. It's just too hard, and that's okay.
Yes, it is. And I'm going to put this as a part 2 of that question that's open to anyone who wants to answer. And it's coming from Melissa Cobbler, who the second part of the question is, how have you all been creating care for yourself and also through your work? So I'll read the whole context of it. She says, Brown University professor Tina Campt charged us to think differently about what kinship, community, and care look like during this pandemic. How has each artist been creating care for themselves and also through their work?
Well, I talked to you about this yesterday. I don't know if I'm doing self-care. I don't know how to do that. Especially not with the 7-year-old running around terrorizing me during most of the day, and homeschooling is like a nightmare. But I have made a concerted effort to cook good meals for them, cook things that I don't know how to cook, things that I don't have access to. Like I always joke around about how the Caribbean food here is terrible. And generally, whenever I want to eat something, I have to learn how to cook it myself. So I've sort of taken upon myself to learn how to make things that I ate growing up, so that my son can have access to it. So like, they're not always successes. My beef patties were not the best, but you know, I try. But for me, I want to make sure that, you know, my husband started a garden like right as we were about to start quarantine, because we already saw what was going to happen. So, you know, he's out there 2-3 hours a day on top of working 12-hour days, like planting and, you know, making sure that we have food to eat. So I take it upon myself to make sure that, because he's working so hard, and because my son is, you know, he's an only child as well, and I was an only child, so I understand how hard this is for him. I try to make sure that they have something comforting to eat. And it's not even so much about me eating it, because I think that I eat less now. I'm very aware of what I'm eating and what I'm consuming. but I want to make sure that nothing changes for them. So I think that I've put my, creating energy into food and cooking and learning how to make things that I think would be very comforting to them. So instead of me eating everything as much as I would like to eat all that bread, I think I've been like, you eat it. Especially because my husband and I are like, it's like we're saving all of the good things in the house to make sure that he eats it, to make sure that our son eats it. So, we're about to run out of meat soon, and we're just like, let's save the bacon and make sure that Kingston gets to eat the bacon. Like, we're sort of holding off of what is satisfying to us and making sure that it's satisfying for him, so that he has some kind of comfort or joy. And he's my day, he's my entire day. Everything in this house revolves around him, to make sure that despite everything that's happening, that he is feeling loved and he feels safe, that he's stimulated, because he's still going through school now. Like, I haven't made very much work. I just don't feel the motivation to at this moment. I've made a few things. One was a piece of him that I think I sent you the image. But aside from that, it's just been cooking and just getting creative in the kitchen. Like, I am horrible with flour, but I've been making the hell out of some dough. Like, it's not pretty, but the bao was good, even though it didn't look, like it came from Royal Mandarin. But I do what I can to make sure that they're healthy and they're taken care of.
Funny how much overlap there is, because I think the kitchen has been a big place for me too over these past couple months. It ain't never seen as much work.
It's a lot of work.
I've been in there going ham, but it's been fun for me, and it's been comforting for me, and it's the making of the food. I've been having a lot of fun taking pictures of the food that I make and sharing it with my family, because for so many years I didn't cook. And so it's like proof that it can happen. It does actually.
Shrimp grits you made looked amazing.
That was good, and I never made it before, so I was excited. It was, it's an opportunity to practice, to find a different kind of art, culinary art, and just like, I think it's just the feeling like you can still nourish yourself in whatever way that looks like, I've also been thinking about giving up meat again as my meat supply gets low, because I've been watching all these reports about people being made to go back to work in terrible labor conditions, and so many of them are also, dealing with the disease. And I'm looking at it like, we don't have to have this. We really don't have to. And in fact, it'd be better for the earth if we didn't. So that's one of the things I've been thinking about. Maybe I'm going to return to a meat-free life. I lived that way for 12 years, pescatarian. So, and then the other thing, one of the silver linings of this has been, I spent a lot of years training in belly dance. And when I moved to New York, which has been 9 years ago now, I had to give that up because my studio was in DC, and I couldn't find anything similar here, which was kind of surprising. But I looked and couldn't find what I wanted, so I just kind of gave it up, which was hard. But as a result of everything moving online, a lot of my sisters have been bringing their dance classes back online, so I've been able to reconnect with them and reconnect with the practice, and discover that my muscle memory is still strong. My bones are giving me the side eye, but my muscle memory is strong. And it's been really, that's been church for me too.
Yeah, I'll say the same. I'm doing a lot of cooking. I can see it in the rounding of my face. That all I'm doing is eating. Me and the kitchen been best friends. Like, I think the Marines, they do like core, country, God, family. I've been doing like food, art, God, family. Food has become first and foremost in my life. I love to eat. Now, now if I was supposed to have a calling in my life, I believe taste tester was one of them. Like, if you want to test this,
I know that.
Like
Why
I'm
did
thinking
your
about
voice
it. I'm
turn
thinking
into
about
a
it. I'm thinking about it. Like if I had to change the game and come out the earth, I'm gonna become a cookie because I love to eat. I love to eat. I believe my family is happy that I'm back in the kitchen cooking. And like straight up, like I would say for the past 3 years, the kitchen and I have not even seen each other, right? And so under this umbrella of COVID, I am eating and I am doing a lot of sleeping, which I have not had a lot of in a very long time. I keep odd hours. I'm pretty much a night owl. And so, you know, the whole sleeping during the day thing is interesting. It's just been interesting to have an actual kind of consistent schedule that hasn't been bombarded by work or being beholden to other people. That's just been a welcome thing to kind of have a schedule of mine own. And for me, that's been self-care. Yeah.
I've just been surrendering to everything, you know, and just allowing myself to, if I want to indulge, I indulge. If I don't want to indulge, I don't indulge in whatever that is. But I have to say that it's not even, I think the thing that has really, really been really helpful for me is in something that someone, it's not about what I've done for myself, but about what someone has really done for me. And so I have some really amazing girlfriends, and it's really interesting to me at this time in my life, recognizing how much I'm surrounded by older women. I find myself in the company of older women who I call my sisters, and I feel that in understanding what it means to come out of one's girlhood and to step into womanhood, that there is a sense of patience that is that they hold with me, and so I find care in those moments. There's, you know, like one of my sisters, we talk every day. I'm, you know, like when I realized that, I remember one day I was in such a hole. It seemed like every Thursday I would get into these holes for a while, and she would just call me and we would just both just lie in bed together and talk, you know, just talk it through as if she was in bed with me. And those moments are incredibly beautiful. Or on Friday when Freeze Fair opened, and normally we would walk Freeze together, we were like, let's walk the fair together. And what did that mean? We stayed on a video call the entire day together, you know. Sometimes we'll dress up, you know, and we call it the rehearsal for the reopening of outside, you know. So on Friday we were like on the phone from like 11:30 in the morning until 11:30 at night, just, you know, perusing, taking a break in between because she had to teach, and then meeting up back and just going through the galleries and eating a meal together and chatting and just laughing and just having a good time, as if this was just another day when the two of us would have been in the same place, same time, and spending the whole day together. So I mean, I those are the things that have really helped me in this time, just leaning into it all and feeling held by people, even though they're so far away from me.
I will say that Erykah Badu thing last night with Jill Scott, good God, that made me feel so good. The camaraderie, and one of the things about a lot of these sets and conversations that have happened online is that it like humanizes these celebrities. So it's like to see the admiration that they had for each other was really beautiful, and just like watching them sing each other's songs and stuff like that. There was just something about that last night that, God, it felt so good to see that. They were like amazing. It just, something about that just like gave me some life, and just, it was so exciting to watch.
I think especially for Generation X, like all these IG lives, it's been like, especially for us, I feel like, you know, D Nice and Manny Fresh has been getting it in, and
yeah,
you know, Questlove, like all these opportunities just to like be with our entire ass generation at a party.
Yeah.
It really does feel like that. you know, and so that's been something I've been really grateful for too.
I love how it brought
the introduction to the soundtrack of you're like, oh, Makeba.
Oh, hey, don't you put them shoulders back. Come on, go ahead. What you want?
I was just saying, it was like talking with Fahamo earlier, it's like these women are part of the soundtrack of my life.
That's right.
You know, first kind of real boyfriend in college, got through Jill Scott with that, like, right? And Erica, like, they're just like the soundtrack of my life. And like hearing them last night, like I had oscillations between laughing and tears because it was just that beautiful.
So
and then how they built up one another was everything.
yeah.
Oh my God, it was everything. They were so loving toward each other.
Yeah.
And it was just beautiful. Yeah.
You said what I was going to say, so that's it. Andrea, we so appreciate your question, but we really, really want to honor our panelists' time. I'm going to drop it in the questions, and maybe you have everybody's social media handles. You can reach out to them specifically, but we just really want to thank you for coming in and making that time for us. This was such a edifying, revealing, vulnerable, appreciated, and meaningful conversation. Thank you so much for saying yes and showing up.
Having us.
Thank you for asking me.
Your moderation.
Yeah.
This was